is the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DawBench Radio Show. I'm your host, Vin Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And I'm joined again by my co-host, Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States. How you going, Pete?
Good, Vin. How about you?
I'm okay, you know.
Hey, what's it, 5:30, 5 o'clock, something like that in the morning your time?
Just don't remind me. Yeah, it's about 5:30, but it's okay. Lucky there's no visual, mate. Lucky it's only audio only.
Have you had your morning tea?
I've had my tea. Thank you very much. No, I'm good. I'm ready to go. Now, we have a special guest today coming in from London in the UK, and that is Jules Storer. Now, Jules is the founder and lead developer of Tracktion, which is now called Tracktion Wave, which is a popular cross-platform DAW application with development being ongoing for over 2 decades. Also, Jules is the developer of the JUCE programming framework, which is a widely used open-source cross-platform C++ application framework for the development of desktop and mobile audio applications and plugins. Welcome, Jules.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
You're most welcome, Jules. Now, just before we tip into this, just from a personal perspective, Tracktion now originally came to my attention as a DAW. Now, Tracktion is the name of the company, but we can kind of cover that a little bit further along. But as a DAW, my attention was probably drawn to it early 2000s when Mackie used to bundle it in with their audio interfaces, and I'm pretty sure they used to sell it as a independent piece of software as well. So that was my first attention. Yeah, so early 2000s. Look, personally, I never really gave it too much focus because I was just so locked in with the other DAWs that I was testing and using at the time. And by the time I started developing the DAWbench Universal Suite, where I started expanding the testing across multiple DAWs. Now, that was around 2009, 2010. It had disappeared by then. And again, we can cover all this in the context of the show. So it had disappeared. So it was not one that I'd actually said, okay, I'm going to actually port this to Tracktion as well to see how that engine behaves. And then it's reappeared again. I hadn't really paid too much attention up until probably about, a couple of weeks ago. All my feed was starting to get flooded with the new release of Tracktion Wave 13. And I went, you know what, I'm going to have a look at this. And as you know, over the last couple of weeks, I have spent a lot of time in Tracktion 13, getting familiar with it and putting it through its paces in comparative performance testing. And again, we can cover that in more detail. But I'm happy that I've sat in front of it, given it some time, so I know exactly what the DAW's about, and at least have a good grounding of what you've actually achieved with the DAW. So with that out of the way, I think a great way to start, Jules, would be if you can give us an overview of your personal history with music and technology and how that led you to initially developing the Tracktion DAW.
Yeah, it was interesting trying to think of all the dates when you asked me to. You said you wanted to talk about this on the show. I was like, oh God, what year was this? Yeah. I mean, I kind of I started my career in about the mid-90s, and I was doing stuff I started off in video software at one company, and then I did some audio with this company that did radio stuff. And but then there was a point where I kind of was made redundant from a company, and I was tinkering around, and I started trying to record because I was a bad guitarist, like so many of us. And I tried to record it at home on an old 486 PC back in the 90s, late 90s, and had a really, really bad experience with all of the software back then. And I thought, I write software. Hey, I could write some software that does this better, so I can record my guitar. And so, I started tinkering, and one thing led to another. There was. I remember a nice moment when I sort of finally I sort of quit my day job when Tracktion was just released and had started selling. I probably quit my day job a little too soon, but it was. It was. I think that point in about 1999, 2000, whenever it was kind of the last time when you could actually write a DAW on your own, when it was actually possible. So I just snuck into the window of being able to do that, really. It was because I was a bad guitarist and I wanted to record it, and I like writing software, and these things sort of, what else do? You write some recording software,
right?
And got a bit carried away.
Yeah.
And still doing it 25 years later.
Yeah, that's a similar story, almost to what Justin Frankel said, that what was the motivation to actually writing a DAW, and he said, well, I didn't really like what it was about, so I decided to write one for myself.
Yeah, I remember I had some free copy of like one of the early Cubasis or something.
Yeah,
and it was awful. I mean, everything was awful back then. It's not it's not that they were particularly awful. They were Pro Tools was way out of my league.
Yeah,
and I just looked at that and thought, oh, come on, surely I can do better. I mean, that's the thing with DAWs, though. It's so much harder to write one than you think it's going to be. But, back then, they were all bad enough that you could write a bad DAW and it would be good enough. So, that's how I got started. I think nowadays you hear people saying, oh, we're going to write a new DAW, and you think, oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah. So the first release, and I've got a bit of chronological order here, up until at least version 4, and that's where I've kind of lost the trail. But 2002 was the first release of version 1 under Raw Material Software. So that was your personal company, right?
Yeah, that was my little company that I set up to do it, yeah. I did a few other bits of consulting. And actually, that's the company I carried on and did JUCE under a bit later as well.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So you want to tell us how the collaboration with Mackie eventuated? So that was probably about a year later.
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't long after I launched it, and they got in touch with me and had sort of seen it and were, sniffing around for a DAW of their own, trying to get more into software. Mm-hmm. And that was a perfect timing for me because, hey, I got something acquired in a small way. Yeah. And got their weight behind it. So they did version 2, didn't they? And then version 3.
Yep.
And I think by version 3, I'd kind of moved away from working with them.
Right.
Because there was a point where they wanted to they didn't actually acquire it. They kind of took exclusive rights to Tracktion. And at that point, I thought, this is great. I like them a lot. Great company. I want them to do this. But there was all this stuff in that I'd written for the DAW, library code, that I thought, oh, I really like this library code. It's stuff that I could use for other things as well. There's no point in me giving them everything. So I sort of, when they made the offer, I kind of quickly went away and tidied up the code base. So I split out all the library code and put that on one side, and I put all the DAW code on the other in another pile. And I said, okay, I'm going to license you the DAW as a product, but I'm going to keep this library code that it uses. And I called that JUCE.
Right.
And it was, and I'd written all this stuff for the DAW because, if you write a DAW, it's not just audio. You have to write. In those days, you had to write your own GUI framework. Because they didn't exist. If you look at Ableton at the same time, they did exactly the same thing as me, and it even looked kind of similar in the way we drew polygons. So you wrote your own GUI framework, you wrote your own audio and MIDI drivers, you wrote your own plugin handling, you wrote your own, just millions of little bits and bobs, file, disk handling. All these things were very primitive, and you couldn't get off the shelf software to do it back then. So you wrote it. And I'd done that like everyone else was doing it. And all the big DAWs have this all baked into them. But at that point, I thought, I kind of want to keep this. So I did split it all up nicely, tidied it. And that was a really good decision. So, and at the point where Mackie were going to doing version 3, I tidied up the library and the JUCE stuff enough that I thought, well, this is really nice. I want to be selling this. I'm more interested in this than I am the DAW at this point. So I kind of parted ways with Mackie amicably and said, look, I'm going to go off and do my library and my geeky coding side of things. And I made that my main focus.
So Jules, the big question from the audience here, and we've all made assumptions, but what does JUCE stand for?
It's definitely a backronym. The J stands for Jules, and the other bit, I wanted it to be 4 letters, and that sounded good. And I mean, C is probably C++ or C or classes, and the U I always thought would be useful or utility. I could never quite decide what the E should be.
Oh, engine, right? Yeah.
Engine, it's not. Yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
JUCE is useful. C++ engine. Jules is. I mean, yeah. It doesn't matter. It's a backronym.
Now we know why it's not covered anywhere, but everybody's always been like, what does JUCE stand for?
Nobody knows. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. And look, and that's and we kind of discussed this in the pre-chat, but that's, you've got a way of thinking outside of the box, Jules, because there are other DAW developers that developed frameworks that while they were developing their respective DAWs, but none of them, not that I know of, have actually split it off and actually.
Yeah. I mean, most of them did, because like I say, a DAW it's one of those really, really complicated products where you do need all that stuff.
Yeah.
And if you were doing one today, you'd use all off-the-shelf components for all those things you need. But they didn't exist in 2002, so that was a niche that JUCE filled, and over the years I became more and more, I sort of drifted away from my main interest being the product and the music side of it, and more into the coding and the good quality, the clean quality coding kind of aspects of what I do. Yeah, more geeky.
Yeah, well, let's leave JUCE for later in the show, because we've got a whole section to kind of cover that side of it, and I'll let you and Pete off the leash for that one. All right, then you guys can talk about all your code stuff. But let's just swing it back. Let's just swing it back to Tracktion. So version 3, and again, I've got a chronological thing going in front of me just so that I can follow this. You'd left Mackie in 2005, and 2007 is when they released version 3. So that would have been the first version that they would have released without you being there. And then I've just got a note here that by 2008 they dropped the software. So that kind of times in perfectly of why it didn't come across my attention when I was building that DAWbench Universal Suite, because that was around 2009, 2010. It had completely disappeared.
Yeah, Mackie had a sort of a bit of a corporate wobble and decided they weren't really into software.
Right.
And it just got shelved. I don't think there was anything wrong with it or the project. It just sort of, corporation stuff, and it got put on one side. But yeah, it's a shame.
Yeah, the bean counters probably had a bit of a look at it and went, hey, this is not adding up.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. Yeah.
So there's an interesting story of how you actually regained control of it. So that was around 2012. You want to fill us in on that one? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, James Woody, was an old friend of mine, and he was at Mackie. I met him there, and he was a product manager for Tracktion at the time, and we stayed in touch. And he left around the same time, around 2009 or something, and went off to join various other industry companies. And then he called me up in about 2011 and said, look, hey, he'd been at the pub with the Mackie guys, and they had this. They still had to support Tracktion because they'd given away bundled it with all their things, but they weren't working on it. So they just had all these customers complaining that it didn't work. And they'd said to him, look, why don't you take it back? Just go away, take it away, and take all the support with you. And so he called me up and another ex-Mackie friend of ours, and we got together and said, okay, let's do this. Let's revive it, make a business out of this. And by that time, I was still busy with JUCE, but that was going well. And I had a bit of, I could focus on something else as well. So we thought this could be fun. And we just wanted to rescue it. So we kicked that off and dusted off the cobwebs.
I think I ran across it around that time, and hopefully I'm not confusing it with something else, but I remember being at one of the first A3E events it was actually in Boston. And I remember seeing something about Tracktion Wave there, and I don't remember what year that was, but it would have been around then.
It's Waveform. It's Waveform, not Wave.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was the first time I ran across it, but it was in development at the time.
Right. I mean, it took us a while to get it going again and to modernize it and bring it up to speed. But it's fun, like restoring an old car.
So the comeback version was version 4.
Probably. And then we kind of lost track of the versions because you asked me what they were, and I don't know. Somewhere between 4 and 13.
Yeah.
We tried to do about one a year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's good. So, I mean, it's been constantly developed. Now, one thing that I did notice when I was reading up with Tracktion 13, now, is it waveform? Have I been calling it wave? I've been calling it wave.
You said wave. You called it wave in your introduction. I didn't want to interrupt, but it's fine. It's fine.
I don't get that level of respect, Vin.
Yeah, that's okay. You can kick me. I don't know how the hell do I actually
It's fine. I'm used to everyone getting... If I wanted people to get the names of things I do right, I should have chosen names that people can misspell. Like Tracktion, nobody puts the C in, even though it's like track. And everyone spells it with just a K.
Yeah.
And JUCE, everyone spelled... Well, actually, JUCE isn't so bad these days, but for a long time, it was everyone put the I in.
So now we can set the record straight and get everybody to stop misspelling these words here.
Yes,
so you all heard it here first.
Yeah, it's Tracktion has a C in it, please. They're just...
Yes.
But, it's fine. It's fine.
And there you go. And I do apologize, and I'll make sure that it's waveform.
Waveform, yeah. Yeah.
And one of the notes with, what's new was that there was a note that you guys had completely rewritten the engine. Now, I mean, that's, not exactly a small task.
Yeah, well, that's another. I mean, I guess this is the thing I keep doing is I'll build a product and then pull a bit out of it and split it all up like I did with JUCE originally. So as we were working on Tracktion, what year would it have been? About 2015 or 16, I think. There was a company showed interest in acquiring it because they wanted to build a DAW. So we talked to them and they said, we want to acquire it so we can build this DAW. And they showed us what they were planning to do. And they wanted a DAW that was nothing like Tracktion. And so we said, well, we don't want to sell you this just so you can throw half of it away and do a new interface on it. So what we said to them was, but hang on, maybe rather than buying the company and changing the product, maybe what you really want is the engine that we've got, and then you can write your own front end for it. You write your own GUI,
Right.
And we could license that to you, and we'll refactor it ourselves. So we'll just do this trick again of splitting out this reusable library, and so we sort of jumped into that. It took, 6 months, a year, to untangle the engine from the front end into a point where they could take that and use it. But we were really happy with that. And then, of course, once we had that, we then turned that into a business in its own right of licensing that engine to other people building DAWs, because writing a DAW engine is ridiculously hard. And unless you have 10 years to spend, it's a lot easier just to license one. And then you can do all your fancy GUI and make it look however you want. And you might not be even using all the features of the engine, but actually having a battle-tested engine is very hard to do from scratch.
Yeah, and again, thinking outside the box, Jules.
You say that, but it's the same trick I did the first time around. So,
but I mean, in the sense that I don't know any other DAW companies that have unbolted something as core as the audio engine and said, hey, you know.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. I think the problem with them is they have too many employees. Imagine if you've got a team of like 30 developers working on an engine on your DAW. It's too big. You can't turn a ship like that. Like a project of splitting up a big tangled ball of string into two tidy balls of string. You know, it's something we could do because it was just me and Dave Rowland. We just sat and did it.
Yeah,
and we just took the whole thing apart. And you know, we didn't worry about breaking things. Whereas if you're a big company with a budget and schedules and release dates and feature lists and all the big corporate stuff, you can't really take that risk of just breaking all your software.
Yeah, no.
Whereas we were kind of agile enough to be able to do that.
Yep.
And also, once you get past 10 years on a project, it's kind of hard to do this. Yeah.
Look, I think some of the larger DAWs are definitely the code team is so compartmentalized. Sometimes the left hand's not knowing where the right hand is going, and you know I've had discussions with numerous guests over the years, and it's probably something we can get into a little bit further. But for me, I think with some of the DAWs, as the engines are actually developing, they're not going forward. They actually seem to be going backwards. But you know that's a contentious kind of topic. But
well, I mean, in the course of like licensing this engine to other companies over the last 7 or 8 years, what we've seen are we've licensed it to a lot of companies who had DAW engines, who wanted a new one, who wanted to improve them but couldn't because they were just too. It was just spaghetti code. They couldn't do anything with it. Yeah. It was easier for them to license out a new one and just start from scratch than to update what you've got.
And then just bolt it into an existing... And so they're bolting this into existing DAWs?
I have not seen anyone do that yet.
Right.
They're generally creating new iterations of their software.
Okay.
I wish I could talk about some. We're obviously heavily NDA'd.
Yeah.
Some really interesting uses of it out there.
Yeah. Well, and look, and as you know, I've been trying to take some guesses of who's been using the engine, and I was actually wrong. So I'm just going to just sit back and shut up, with that one. We won't push you any further. But look, very interestingly, with that, just on that, not all of the DAW developers are large teams. Like, for example, Justin over at Reaper, there's only Justin and John, right? They're the two.
Oh, is there only two of them? I thought there were a little bit more than that.
Nope, there's only two of them. So, like even during the show, I'm saying that, if someone screws something up in the code, you know who to blame. You just point the finger at the other bloke, Yeah.
And then there's Bitwig's very small as well. They're a small team.
Yeah, for about four, I think four. And even smaller again is Arda. We've had the Arda developer on, and that's completely open source. But I mean, he's got some control of the actual final product, obviously.
Oh, sorry, Vin, I couldn't get past your accent there. You mean Ardor?
Well, if you remember, there was a discussion about the pronunciation.
Nope.
There was a discussion about the pronunciation, and he said Arda. He actually, what's his name? Oh, forgive me, but he pronounces it Arda, and I used to pronounce it Ardur.
I know it's terrible when the person who creates the product can't pronounce it correctly.
Well, as the English person in the room, I guess I would also say Ardor. Oh, no, I say Arda. I'd say it like you.
Yeah, then, and he's English, and the name escapes me, and I'm going to get a kicking for that one. But with Ardour, just to keep Pete happy, right? Just to keep and make it sound, a little bit more sophisticated. They actually have like one of the other DAWs that uses Arda as a base. See, I'm just switching between Arda and Ardour now. Is Harrison Mixbus. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but they used Arda as a basis for their DAW. But this is different. It's not like just the engine. I mean, they use the whole
thing, yeah.
Yeah, and then they overlay a mixer with some very specific channel plugins and stuff that emulate their desk. That's a pretty cool concept, but it's different to what you've done. Now, one thing that I wanted to ask you is that both JUCE and the engine are open source, but they're also licensed. Can you just explain that a little bit for us?
Sure. I mean, it's quite a commonly done thing where you open source all of the source code for a library under I think called the GPL, the GNU Public License. And the terms of that are you can share the source with whoever you like and you can build it. But if you build a product out of it and ship it as a binary, you have to also distribute all the source code, including your own.
Right.
So if you write a plugin with JUCE, or if you write a DAW with the Tracktion engine, you can do that for free as long as you give away all of your source code as well. So obviously, if you don't want to do that, then you can come to us and we'll give you a special non-GPL license for money, and that lets you do whatever you want with it.
Right.
So it's really great that everyone can see it. Everyone can look at the source code. It's all out there. Everyone can inspect it, poke around, try it out, build a product. But when you actually get to shipping a product, then you have to buy a license for it if you want to keep your own stuff secret, which most people do commercially.
Right. Yeah.
And also for a commercial license, we'll give support and things as well.
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, I've got a friend in Tasmania, Andrew Jerram, who wrote a little app for my audio interface, low latency performance database project that I've done, and it's just called the DPC utility. No, not DPC utility. Oh God, I've had an absolute brain fade.
He needs catchier names. If he wants me to come up with a badly spelled name,
no, it's actually a
that.
Great name. It's just that it's too early in the morning. My brain faded. The RTL utility. So it actually very accurately measures round trip latency. Hardware round trip latency. So we kind of call it the MythBuster. So if all the audio interface manufacturers want to sit there and claim that they're kind of achieving this type of I/O and round-trip latency, we can very quickly just check exactly what the interfaces are.
Did he do that with JUCE? Because I actually wrote one of those in JUCE. You could write it in a few lines of code.
Well, he uses JUCE.
Oh, well, he probably just used the one that I wrote to do that.
There you go.
I actually wrote that for the DAW, so you could do things like, so you could actually calibrate the timings, because back in the day on Windows, the latency was just all over the place with direct sound, and it was a bit of a nightmare. You keep measuring it, and every time you measure it, it would come back with a different number.
Well, of course, no, but I've seen that with commercial. I've seen that with some commercial interfaces as well and drivers, where you ping and you get a different result. That was quite a while ago. Thankfully, the drivers now I'm not seeing that a lot, but I have seen it before, and it's like, wow, how do you actually use this? It was quite an eye-opener. Well, that's interesting. Well, there you go. Hey, just before we get in, again, I know we're heading towards JUCE, but I do want to talk about the DAW development, and especially the performance of the engine as well, and some of the things that you guys need to be navigating with that. And, of course, you've been around long enough to have ridden that wave of the multi-core processors just increasing, and I had a quick email exchange with Dave as well, and he sent me a couple of videos, and my eyes glazed over because he was giving speeches at this code seminar, and I did send him to Pete, and Pete would probably have it. I'm not sure whether Pete actually watched them or not, but
well, Pete might have been there. I think that was one of our ADCs. I think one of our ADC conferences.
Were you there, Pete?
I don't think I was at that one. I was at one of them. I don't remember which one though, actually.
Yeah. But even though from my level there was some really interesting areas of the discussion, especially when he was talking about multi-threading and multiprocessing and optimizing for that, and he was discussing that one of the end users had sent him this massive real world project it would have been a large number of tracks, bussing, effects, sends, the whole thing, usual deal when you get into a mix. And he then just showed us this graph of how he mapped out how the engine was needing to actually process all of these different aspects of it.
Yeah.
And it looked like something out of, those old photos of when the mathematicians have got the blackboard that's about 10 foot high and they're on a ladder sitting there writing it. That's what it looked like to me. Oh, what the fuck?
Yeah. Well, the thing about the performance side of things is though, like you say, we remember back in the days when you had one core or two cores.
Yep.
And back then, it was understandable. You could optimize. You could understand what the computer's doing and optimize. You could write code and you go, oh, this will run faster. This won't run faster. But as things have moved on, they've got more and more cores, and the CPUs have become so much more complicated, and the whole system becomes more complicated. There was a point a few years ago where you don't really know as a programmer whether a change you make is going to be good or bad, and really you have to measure it. You have to try things out. But then even when you try out a particular strategy, it might work well on your computer. You don't know if it's going to be twice as slow on a similar one. Right. On a different day, a different phase of the moon, and it might be completely different. So it's gone from being, kind of a real nerdy assembly language kind of pastime to being, all the way up to being kind of beyond human intelligence at this point to really optimize well. So I think it's really why it's quite interesting hearing about what you're doing with DAWbench. Like you're just throwing real world tasks at it, which is really all you can do now. In the old days, we would look at we'd split it up and we'd say, okay, we're going to optimize this particular bit of the audio pipeline or the audio graph, but it's just doing that now. Kind of that bit might go faster, but it might impact something else in a way you don't even know why. Right. So really, the best thing to do is just optimize the whole thing, measure it, see which bits are the hotspots, and do your best, and then try again. Keep going.
Especially now with all the other types of like the big little processors and
oh god, yeah,
and some of them aren't even just two types of cores. There are some. I know some of the Qualcomm stuff has 3 types of cores in there.
Yeah,
and being able to optimize for those, that's quite a challenge.
I mean, the worst of all is Android devices. I'm luckily away from that firing line now, but back a few years ago doing JUCE and trying to look at how Android was performing, and it was just an absolute, no idea. The CPUs would go faster and slower, your threads would get higher and lower priorities. It was just all over the place. And we were talking to the guys at Google who did this, and they were sort of giving us general pointers, but they were going, well, it's don't know was a lot of the answers. It's become more of an art form now than a science, getting this stuff right.
Yeah. Look, and again, this is part of some of the pre-show discussion, but I mean, we were discussing how just the level of processing that we can actually throw at these machines now. A lot of people just take them for granted, Jules. I mean, look, we're old enough, we're all old enough to remember that in the late 90s, even running one reverb in real time was like a revelation. It was like, wow, we can run a one reverb in real time. And for me, I just tracked that whole scaling. I went from we went from single core, and then we went into dual core, and then we went to dual core, and then let's just say we went from single core and we went to dual core. There wasn't really too much of a transition from 1 to 2. When we got to 4, I remember that distinctly. There was a couple of the major DAWs that fell completely in a heap, and I'm going, it's only, mate, I'm swearing, I'm going, fuck, it's only 4 cores. What's going on? And the thing completely collapsed. And this was multiple of these DAWs, by the way, and not only just one. By the time we got to 8, it was like I mean, I'm cranking out the saxophone. It was like a Benny Hill show, right? These guys are running around trying to figure out how to get 8 cores to actually sync and thread together.
It is a really hard problem. I mean, I remember doing, was it me? Was it me who took the first, I took the first stab at turning Tracktion's engine into a multi-core engine back in whenever the hell that was.
Can you remember what year that was?
I can't even remember if that was before we got it back from Mackie or not. I think it would have been after.
Well, I mean, the multi-cores, let's just give it a bit of a timeline trajectory, right? So, because things really started accelerating around 2017. But for a while there, 4 cores was like pretty much maxed, right? And then I think 6 core early around 2010, 2011, we started getting into 6 cores and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason they all fell flat was because no one had really thought ahead to this when they wrote those engines. So the first attempts at making the engines go multi-core would have been like I did that, which I think I probably made each track run on a different core.
They're still doing that. But they're still doing that.
No, well, some do maybe, but so for a long time, that's what we did in Tracktion. It would be per track. So you'd split the tracks up and you'd send them to different cores, and that was fine.
Yep.
But then the latest iteration of our engine, about a year ago, I think, Dave did a lovely rewrite where he again broke it down even more. So now you have the engine and you have like the audio graph library.
Right.
And so essentially what we do is we throw away all we don't care whether it was a track or not. We just build a big audio graph out of the whole thing. And then the audio graph gets multi-threaded, and so we just it just gets partitioned across each job in this massive rendering bunch of nodes that all need to be rendered. There's a thread pool, and the pools just pick up whatever needs doing. So it's no longer one track per core; it's more like a bunch of cores picking work tasks off a big list and doing whatever needs to be done first. So you might have like it depends on what's on the tracks, but you could even have parallel stuff happening on a single track because the tracks have kind of been forgotten about by the time we're actually playing it. And that's the sort of thing that if we'd all thought about that back in 1999, you'd have done that from day one. But nobody at that time could afford a dual core machine, so nobody even thought that far ahead. But so I think everyone was playing catch up for a few years there.
Right. Pete, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love the idea of just looking at it as, a big graph of work to be done and then just picking off what you can do at that time. I can see where that graph can get unreasonably complex over time, but at that point, you probably don't care what it looks like. It's all up for grabs for the processor. It's
absolutely,
It doesn't need to be human understandable.
Oh, no, humans can't see this graph.
Yeah, but I would think for debugging that and stuff, that would be like you're sacrificing some of the debuggability for the performance, which I think is probably the right trade-off there.
I'm not sure you even are, to be honest, because
really?
I think if you're debugging a problem, actually having it at these abstraction layers generally makes it a bit easier, because now what you have is you have, like in our engine, you have the model of what you're playing. So the model is the data model is like what you want to play. So it's got tracks and clips and effects and things, and that's what we save, and that's what you see on the screen, and that's the model of the timeline. And then there's a transformation step that turns it into the graph, and then once it's the graph,
right,
you're kind of in a whole other section of the code base where you don't have to worry about where it came from. So actually debugging that, you've got a different set of types of node that are more understandable. It's hard to describe, but I think it actually it breaks the problem down. So you can say, the thing I'm debugging, it's something wrong with the graph, or it's something wrong with the transformation step, or it's something wrong with the model. And so you don't have to worry about the rest. Whereas if that stuff's all tangled together, you'd be tracing up and down and seeing all this stuff while you're trying to figure out where the problem is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize there was more of that approach.
It's very hard to explain that better. But
the other interesting part of that is there are people in the industry who just kind of make it their value to know the little tricks for Like, if you bus things a certain way in this DAW, you're going to get much better performance with this many CPUs and stuff. And your approach would seem to pull some of that out, which I think is probably a good thing.
Yeah, I would hope. Yeah, I would really hope that our approach pulls it out, because, ideally you should be able to not care what you're starting with.
Right.
It's actually very similar to, getting really geeky here, but kind of my more recent work in the last few years has all been about compilers. And it's kind of like writing a compiler. You start with a model, you compile it down to a graph, and then you run that graph as efficiently as you can on the hardware. So it means that you kind of you don't have to worry about hardware when you're thinking about the model, and then anything above that. It should be completely hardware independent, and then that all the knowledge that your code needs to have about hardware and how best to use it pushes it all down to this much more simple problem of rendering this graph. And it might be able to completely restructure the graph to render it better. But you've got the freedom to do that at that point, which you wouldn't have if you're just trying to play the model as directly, which is how you'd naively do this problem. That's how I started off, and how every DAW in the world would have had their V1 would have been like, here's our model, just try and play it.
V1, that's very generous of you. pretty sure there's some higher version numbers out there.
Probably one or two.
Yeah.
And look, and where I find this interesting is just from, again, because I'm not a coder, so I have to take a step back and see how this actually plays out in practicality in just, working environments, and even under just my DAWbenching type of environments, where I can test the parallel processing. I can actually test the busing. I've had a few, let's say, suggestions from the gallery about where DAWbench was lacking, because they're just saying, well, it's just an empirical multiprocessing saturation test. It's not really replicating any type of real world environment. I'm thinking, okay, so what is it that you want? And they're going, well, you should be focusing on single core performance. And I'm thinking, meaning? They're going, well, serial processing. I've thought, okay. And the premise there was that a serial process in a DAW is always landing on a single core. And if you start loading a particular track or a bus vertically, you're going to tap out a core and you're going to bring the session down prematurely. So I thought, okay, so I developed some test scenarios with that, and the first thing that I discovered, Jules, which I think we kind of discussed this in the pre-chat, was that not all DAWs actually handle the serial processing in the same manner. Some were definitely still landing on one single core, right? No doubt about it. And that also depended on whether the hybrid engine was kicked in or not. So, for example, if you had the hybrid engine in, it would actually load balance across multiple cores. So it was finding some way of actually parallel processing the serial process within that bus or track. If you turned the hybrid engine off, it would land on a single core. So it would go back to what the end users were traditionally, thinking this is the way that these DAWs are working, or the engine is actually thread managing. But the bottom line is that across 4 or 5 DAWs that I tested, all of them were actually managing that straight serial process completely differently. And I've actually just done that exact test with Waveform 13 as well, as you know, because I've been I've been flooding you all this information.
Me with information, yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting to see that, even for yourselves, to see how that empirical serial process was actually being thread managed.
And, the thing these days with modern CPUs is a really, really huge part of the actual performance is going to depend on cache. Cache, the amount of cache you have on your CPU, and how the running process, the order in which the running process is reading and writing to memory, and how much cache there is, the interplay of those two things is going to make a vast difference to the performance. And especially when you have a DAW that's maxed out, because you've got a lot more data flowing through it than will fit in the cache. So, for example, if you had some serial processing that used a load of memory, that might actually be, you might get away with it as long as there's not much else going on, and it can use the whole cache to itself. But the same amount of processing when there's other stuff going on and hitting the cache, if you see what I mean, can then tip it over, and the whole thing can go a bit bonkers, and all the performance degrades.
Yeah. And
so the interplay of all these things is, again, this is what I was saying before about it's kind of beyond what you as a programmer, as a mere human, can really predict is going to happen.
Yeah.
So the only way to do it is like, don't worry about focusing in on little bits of it, like serial, or whether the serial stuff is fast. Just throw a real world workload at it, measure it, look at the measurements, and go, oh, this bit's going slowly. Let's try and improve that.
Yeah. Yep.
And one of the ways you might improve it is not by trying to make it faster, but by trying to make it use less memory.
Yes. Yeah.
Which might be a different thing altogether than improving the serial speed.
Yeah. Look, I think it's all a combination of stuff, and I'll bring an example. The X299 HEDT platform that Intel ran for quite successfully for about 4 or 5 years. They were performing extremely well with virtual instrument, large virtual instrument templates, and they weren't very high in clock speed. They had enough cores. They went anywhere from 8 to 18 cores, but they were not very high in clock speed. But they had 4-channel DDR4, so there was memory bandwidth, and it had a stack of cache as well. So we were always, trying to work out exactly why these machines are performing so well in this specific virtual instrument test. And it kind of came about when we moved to DDR5, and it was, even though it was a dual channel, but it kind of runs in like a RAID. So it gave us the memory bandwidth and throughput of a 4-channel DDR4 array, and all of a sudden, those machines with very similar architectures from the previous generation, and the clock speeds went up a little bit, but there was this massive improvement in the virtual instrument test, and I went, bang, it's memory throughput. It's not the speed. And they're all going, oh, we're going to increase the speed of the memory. I was going, it's not the speed. It's actually the memory bandwidth.
It's probably the cache.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. You could break down a little benchmark of like one serial process, and you could sit and optimize that on its own. But that's not going to really tell you anything about how the cache works when it's actually under memory pressure.
Yeah.
And that's over the years that's become more and more of a factor in how fast it really goes at the end of the day.
Yep. And look, the other thing with the tests, I mean, I've built some flexibility in there so that you can build a session where you've got a stack of audio tracks so that you can parallel process some DSP. You can then assign that to buses, and then you can assign whatever you want to those buses, however many tracks, and then you can do some serial processing on the buses. I think I'm going to probably expand it again and throw some effect sends in there as well, just to see what kind of curves we can throw at it. And that's something that I've been doing even more recently, where I didn't do an empirical test. Well, it wasn't set up initially as an empirical test. I've had a close friend in the UK that it's just running real-world mix sessions where it was collapsing on the Windows machine, but it wasn't on his Apple Silicon. And as we dug in deeper, we were realising that half of the cores were being ignored, and it had nothing to do with core parking or anything like that. This is just something that the way that the DAW's thread management was actually arbitrating with the task scheduling. And we're looking at this going, well, why is it ignoring the top 16? So it's a 32 logical core CPU. It was literally ignoring the top 16. And I'm looking at this going, well, that just looks like a P and E core thread management spread where it'll load the P cores first, and then after a certain point, it'll start tipping some load into the E cores. But we weren't dealing with a machine with P and E cores. It was only purely P. So why was the thread management behaving? The dynamic with the thread management was, why is it behaving in exactly the same manner? So this is another rabbit warren that I've been diving down with. I haven't actually ported that session to, waveform yet, but you know what? I think I will, Jules, because the testing that I've done with my other testing scenarios, and again, I do apologise for flooding you with all that info, but that engine...
Vin, you're known to do that.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I was just blowing me away how good this engine was, because we're not dealing with a hybrid playback engine. We're dealing purely something that's running in real time.
Yep.
And I was throwing not only the pure parallel, processing CPU saturation test, this standard DAWbench DSP, which performed very, very well, because I wasn't going easy on it. I wasn't going, hey, let's just give it a 1024 so that it competes against the other hybrid engines that are running at 23 to 34 millisecond in a standard kind of playback at 64. So you set it all at 64, but they're actually playing back at 23 to 34. And it was holding its own, and I'm thinking, hang on, there's something going on here. Realistically, they shouldn't be staying with those other hybrid engines. It shouldn't, but it was.
It's interesting that the stuff you're saying about hybrid engines and talking about it, because it kind of dropped off my radar.
Yeah,
the whole concepts of a hybrid engine. And you started talking about them, and I asked Dave, like, didn't we used to do that? Didn't we used to have? We didn't call it a hybrid engine, but didn't we used to have some bigger buffers that we were doing the non-real-time bits in? And he's like, yeah, and we did, and then we got rid of it because it just wasn't worth it. It just wasn't worth the hassle.
Well, this is the whole premise of that, and that's interesting to hear that, actually, Jules, very interesting. The whole premise of the hybrid engine, and I know exactly when this thing started actually gaining more popularity. I know why it actually started gaining more popularity, which I won't go into here because it's another show. But the real-time engines on the major DAWs kind of peaked at around that 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, and they were performing very, very well. But they weren't performing well cross-platform. So that's the hint, right? They weren't performing well cross-platform. The Apple systems were not performing well at low latency. So the idea was, hey, why don't we introduce a higher playback buffer, and that'll kind of alleviate some of that performance comparative, the gap. And a few of the other DAWs hopped on board. Logic had it from the start, right? So the premise is you can set your audio interface at a preferred real-time low latency buffer for your playing your virtual instruments or your guitar amp sims. Let's just say 64 samples, which is kind of pretty brutal, but that's what I did all the testing at 64, the current testing. And that's really comfortable for playing back your virtual instruments, and it's all great. But when you get to the mix stage, you ain't going to be running at 64, because you're leaving a lot of processor headroom on the table of trying to run it at 64. So the hybrid engines would say, okay, non-real time, we're running at 23 milliseconds, 1024. Anytime you track arm, you're running at that real time latency, the best of both worlds. And I understood what the premise was. The problem being is that some of the recent hybrid engines, I'm just seeing you've got a real world session. Let's just say you got 40 tracks of audio, you got some effect sends, you got some buses, groups and buses, and the engine is absolutely collapsing. Even at playback buffers I've seen upwards of 80 millisecond, right? So the actual engine has collapsed way before it should have. You're using maybe 20% total of your CPU usage, and it's going against the premise of what it was all supposed to be about, because the higher buffers are not actually helping you at that mix stage. They're not helping you at that mix stage. So,
in fact, they might be adding more overhead in actually translating.
Well, I can tell you that this is me not at the code level. I'm sitting back going, on a particular DAW, which we won't have to detail, but I've been tracking this very, very closely because it's one that I actually use predominantly. And I know when there was a significant change to the engine, and I know why there was a significant change to the engine, and I've been watching the hybrid engine performance of that actually go ass backwards for the last 5 years. And I'm thinking someone needs to actually step in and go, what the fuck are we doing here? Because this is now impacting clients of mine who have gone to the later versions of this DAW and gone, you know what, I don't know what's going on, Vin, but I can't open sessions that I did 2 years ago on the same machine. I've gone, I got an idea.
Yeah. Because, I mean, the hybrid thing is a nice idea, but it does come, there's some cost to it. You're rendering these bigger buffers, and you're having to mix them at the last moment with the smaller buffers. So there's an extra step here. You're not just adding two buffers of the same size together. You're kind of chopping bits out of buffers and finding the right bit from a buffer. So there's a bit of overhead for that. And also, these bigger buffers take more memory. If you have a bunch of them going, like this is bigger chunks of memory being passed around. Bigger chunks of memory mean more cache. So they could be tipping over a cache threshold by having these bigger buffers. So
there you go.
This is what I mean. The whole thing is so damn complicated now.
Yeah.
That it's just something that seems like a good idea on paper might actually in the real world do something unexpected when you get the whole system running together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's interesting though, the whole hybrid thing. When Dave's around again, I might have a bit of a sit down with him and think, is there something we could do now we've got to the stage of having the audio graph? Because this is, worrying about hybrid playback where you're looking at tracks and things is one approach. But if we just looked at our audio graph and said which bits of the audio graph could we make real time or non-real time, that could be an interesting point. Where, I mean, maybe that would actually work better than the algorithms that the other engines are doing on a track-by-track basis, if that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I've not actually looked into this yet, but it's definitely something that would be worth a bit of a poke around, because we could. When you've got a system like a simple graph and you're trying to do something like this to it, you've got a better chance of making that work nicely than if you've got a massive model with tracks and all sorts of things, and you have to worry about all the ramifications of, is this track armed, is this track, all that crap kind of goes away.
Yeah, no, of course. And the thing is that you kind of see it in a lot of the real world sessions that a lot of these DAWs are still, it's very much track based, because you can just see it. You can just see the spread of the way that the task schedule is actually assigning processing to specific cores, and it's literally all over the place. I mean, I can do a very empirical load balance and with some nice saturation across all of the available cores. But when you see the more of the real world sessions, they don't play out like that. It's all over the place. But I've got a feeling Waveform was balancing that better. So this comes back to this graph.
That could be the difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a more democratic way of balancing the load.
Yeah. Pete, have you got some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was thinking we should move on a bit here from that one. I think we spent plenty of time on that.
Yeah, I think we've nerded out on that enough. There's only so many people can take a whole hour on
multiprocessing. Well, just before we do go, I mean, the whole thing with, and Pete touched on it as well, with the P&E cores and also Apple Silicon as well, that would have thrown up a couple of nice curves for you, or not.
Yeah, I think Dave handled those. I wasn't in that discussion. I dodged that one.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, it's I guess you can find out how fast the core goes, and
the instruction sets being different and a whole bunch of other stuff. So you did in fact dodge something there, Jules.
Yeah. Well, look, you could see with even with the tests that I did that it was handling the P&E cores as we would expect, i.e. it was loading, the DAW was actually loading the P cores first before it would start sending processing to the E cores. So whatever's been done there, it's actually working, and this is on the Intel, so it's working within the thread director and the task scheduler.
It's interesting, just thinking about the whole, your benchmark tasks. It's the kind of thing where, because we've got the open source engine, you could kind of build a little app that just is the engine and like one of your workloads, and have an app that you could just run on the machine, and it will just benchmark a heavy workload on that machine and just give you a number. Yeah. It'd be quite interesting to try that out, and things to think about. Things to do if I ever have any time, ever.
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. So we'll have a real DAWbench mark.
Exactly, yeah. Just a little app that just tests your machine.
Yeah.
Just hammers it and gives you a big number. Bam.
Yeah, you'll be the new Cinebench, Finn.
Oh, no. At least you didn't say Geekbench. Yeah.
No, those numbers, I don't like those numbers.
I could just imagine. But that's something we can definitely discuss further, Jules. I think we can move on. Just real quickly, Tracktion's ongoing development. So with Tracktion Waveform, with 13, he introduced clip launching, which is new.
Yeah, and that's one of the nice things about doing the whole engine project is we had a client who was using the engine a big project, and what they were building was a very clip launcher based DAW. So they needed a clip launcher, and we didn't really have one.
Right.
So we wrote one, and there was an excuse to do it. And because obviously we'd written a clip launcher in the engine, we added it to our DAW as well.
Oh.
And so it's kind of nice that we have, we may never have done that. We may never have actually got around to doing our own clip launcher for our DAW, driven on our users who weren't really asking for one. But because we were doing that anyway for an engine client, we got a free clip launcher.
Nice.
Yeah, that's cool.
Well, not for free, but...
Well, I was about to ask in regards to, future or, feature sets that you guys weigh up what to introduce and how much is based on community input and feedback, and you've just said it's actually client feedback as well. So
in that case, but yeah, the DAW itself is a mixture, I think.
Yeah, and in regards to the community, you do have a forum over at KVR, I believe.
It's a happy place, isn't it? KVR?
Oh, it's just
I can't bear the positivity. It just makes me smile so much that my face hurts. So I kind of go to other sites mostly.
Yeah, I know, Jules. We had that discussion. It's just, it is our happy place, isn't it? That forum is such a.
You could head over to Gearspace for more of that if you'd like.
Oh, I don't really spend much time there either. It's fun times, yeah.
No. Gearspace is KVR light, Pete. Let me tell you. You just if you want to get into a happy bunny space, you go over to KVR. Just read through some of the joy that actually flows out of some of those threads. Absolutely amazing. Just makes my day. I've just got to get over there a little bit more than once every 5 years that I venture over there. All right. So yes, community. So do you have any social? Do you do much with socials or not? No?
We've got there's a Tracktion Facebook page, and we have a YouTube channel.
Yeah,
I think our YouTube channel's pretty busy.
Yep.
I don't know. Go to tracktion.com. We've probably got some social stuff on there. Probably. I mean, we do quite a lot now. Like the reason we renamed the DAW Waveform was because Tracktion became the company name, and we did other things as well. So we have a whole range of plugins. We distribute third-party plugins, and we do obviously the engine, and then we also we do hardware as well. I mean, we acquired Prism Sound, it's a UK high-end DAC manufacturer.
Yep.
So we do kind of high-end hardware. We do loads of things. So I guess we got social stuff. I don't really spend much time on them.
No beautiful Instagram photos of sexy code or anything like that.
Oh, I don't use Instagram. We might have an Instagram. I don't know.
Does anyone still use Instagram?
I'm not doing a very good job here. I'm not head of marketing, as you can tell.
There you go. I think we can come back to Prism because that's no small acquisition. But let's come back. Let's cycle back to that a little bit later.
Sure.
I think let's get on to JUCE because I know Pete's kind of chapping at the bit a little bit, wanting to chat to you about JUCE. So you did speak a little bit about the initial development. Let's move on to JUCE and let's kind of cover that because, again, that's no small part of what you do, and it is. I was tossing up whether to title this show under DAW Evolution, the DAW Evolution series, or Music Tech Pioneers. And the only reason I'm not actually putting you under the Music Tech Pioneer series of shows, and it's not that you're not a pioneer. It's just that I kind of cut off the music tech pioneers to around 75 to maybe 95, and you're kind of like more a modern.
I just missed it. Oh, it's so close.
Yeah. You're more like a modern day pioneer.
Oh, man.
So
I'm like a Gen X pioneer.
A Gen X pioneer. There you go. So
Gen Z.
You guys, look, I'm gonna just hand the wheel over to you, Pete, with the JUCE stuff. There you go.
And we've covered some of the history of JUCE, which I was particularly interested in. So it was good to hear how it came out originally. It's not something that you necessarily developed with the idea of developing this. It just kind of evolved out of Tracktion and then became its own thing.
Yeah. It was Tracktion. It was a few bits and bobs I was doing before that as well. I just collected a few bits of library code together in a little pile, and then doing the DAW. Obviously, I really needed a lot, and that's when I really built that up. And then I discovered that I liked doing that more than doing the products themselves. So I became more focused on JUCE is a product, but it's a product for developers.
Right.
And I felt better at that because I was a developer and I knew what I wanted. Whereas although I wrote Tracktion originally because I wanted to record myself playing guitar, the guitar sort of fell by the wayside, and I didn't feel like I was really a user of Tracktion anymore. But I was a user of code.
Right.
And so I felt it's always easier to build a product when you want to use that product.
And there's something about software developers always having a dusty guitar in the corner for something like that, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, what I realize here, though, is that we have quite a mix of listeners on this show. And so I think a lot of them may not know what JUCE really is, or the fact that they've probably been using it without realizing that they've been using products built on it. So can you give us like the high level, what is JUCE exactly?
It's in all of it. Like, you would be very hard pressed to find, anyone making music who's not using something that's got JUCE in it. And JUCE it's a code library that is it's the most widely used framework that developers use to build plugins, which is kind of the bulk of it. People use it to build audio apps as well, and some people use it to build completely non-audio apps. But the reason it got a toehold in the audio tech industry is because it made it easy to write a plugin and then publish that as VST, AU, and AAX without having to rewrite the whole thing 3 times.
Right.
So especially for the indie developers who can, like the old school, like the really big plugin companies like Native Instruments and people who've been around since the 90s themselves, they all had their own frameworks for doing this multi-plugin development. But if you're a little indie developer in the 2000s, you don't want to write it all yourself. So it kind of took its place. Found a niche there.
Right.
And I don't know what proportion of plugins use it. Probably most new plugins would be using JUCE. Yeah,
and I've been working with a company that built a DAW entirely in JUCE. I won't name them, but they've built a kind of a neat product there that's all in JUCE. And then it's like you said, all the different plugins. You're right, the ones from the established brands, probably not so much, but most of the other plugins out there are JUCE. And what folks may not realize is there's so many of the smaller apps like you see on iPad. I say smaller, but some of them are quite complex. Smaller apps like you might see on iPad or something like that are also all JUCE made.
Yeah, lots of those. That's true. Yeah, lots of those are JUCE as well. Because a big part of JUCE, it's used in audio, but probably most of JUCE is about the GUI framework for building the UIs, because that's a huge part of a plugin, and any kind of all audio apps have a lot going on visually generally.
Right.
So because I built that GUI for this kind of, I wrote a framework that was good at doing the kind of things you do in a plugin. It kind of took off there.
Yeah, and GUI development cross-platform is non-trivial, right?
It was non-trivial. It's getting pretty easy now. I think nowadays web and browser interfaces have kind of taken over, but certainly for most of the last 20 years, that's not been the case. And yeah, cross-platform GUIs were hard to come by. There was Qt was the other one. There was the big name there, but lots of people really hate that. And it's expensive, and
yes,
and that's where JUCE found its little niche. Because with JUCE, you got this nice GUI framework that was pretty good, and not as fully featured as Qt, but good enough for a plugin. But you also got all the plugin and audio stuff along with it.
And that framework's all on top of OpenGL, right?
No, it uses all different.
I always thought it was OpenGL.
Really? OpenGL is one of the things it uses to render.
Okay.
But it has like at least 3-4 now different backends for rendering.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it all looks the same. It can do a software renderer. It'll do like a macOS renderer, and GL is an option on Windows. But the team are just doing for JUCE 8. There's going to be a direct 2D renderer as well now for Windows.
Oh, nice.
So the idea with it is you don't really care. The same way you don't care what plugin format you're doing. You don't care what the renderer is. It'll look the same. Is the selling point.
Yeah, that's a huge that's even more so than some of the audio integration. That's a huge selling point for people developing cross-platform, which almost all audio stuff is. Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. Absolutely, because if you didn't use something that's going to look pixel for pixel the same on all the different platforms, then you're going to find that you write something on Windows and then you look at it on a Mac and the fonts are all a bit in the wrong place or the colors are a bit different. So just being able to trust that it'll look the same is actually a really big deal.
So it's I've been working with different people at JUCE for different stuff for MIDI 2.0, trying to keep everybody appraised of the changes and stuff coming up there. But really, let me take a step back here for a second. So you started JUCE. It was eventually acquired by Roly, right?
Yeah, that was 2014, I think.
Yeah, and so that's kind of when I first started noticing stuff with JUCE. It was it was part of the Roly products, and it was interestingly, it was even the embedded devices were running versions of JUCE on them as well as I recall, because this runs on more than just desktops. It runs on
you can run it on. Well, I mean, we never did a bare metal version, but it will run on like a low memory Linux device. Yeah,
right. So you were working on that while at Roly, and then eventually this was sold to Pace.
Yeah, Pace. That was 2020. Was that during lockdown they did that? I mean, I wasn't working on it by that point. I mean, I'd sort of drifted away from it. I was still at Roly, but I was working on the stuff that I'm more interested in now, which is new languages for DSP and compilers for DSP. So by the time Pace took it, I was there, but I was a little bit out of the loop.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about the languages here in a minute, because I'm particularly interested in that. So you're not involved in JUCE anymore. It's kind of got its own life at this point.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know the guys, and but we don't see each other much, and we should do more of that, really. But no, I'm not. I'm certainly not involved in the day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, you started something here that has had. I don't want to understate this, because I think it's easy to understate the impact of this, but JUCE has had more impact on audio application and plugin development than just about anything else out there, short of, say, the VST standard.
That's probably true. I mean, I think for me, it kind of the bits about the. I mean, it was really great when I saw people starting to use it and products coming out with it, but I think there were points where I started seeing job adverts for, audio developer wanted, must have JUCE experience. And it's like, it started to feel very real at that point. And also when I saw it like being taught in universities as part of a course, it's like, that's when it felt like it was really, something pretty big.
And it was super easy to use. Like I had to do some benchmarking a few years back.
You say super easy to use. It's C++. I mean, it's only, there's a certain level below which you can't go in easy to use.
If you're a C++ developer, it's super easy to use.
Yeah.
I'll caveat that. If you're Vin, it's not so easy to use, right? So,
hang on. Yeah. What's going on here? Throwing me under the bus. What?
Oh, absolutely. I had to do a benchmark of some MIDI stuff several years back because I kept getting all these comments from people about MIDI jitter on Windows and a bunch of other stuff. And so I threw together a quick JUCE app that compared the two different frameworks that we had for MIDI, did some timing of it, a whole bunch of measurements, spit out the data to a spreadsheet, and showed that the jitter was actually quite a bit lower than most people thought. But it was incredibly easy to do that and switch back and forth between the two different APIs just using JUCE. And that's for somebody who's building Windows applications natively all the time. But so that says something about JUCE there. Hey, Vin, I think it would be good to talk about some of the, like, especially the languages and stuff here. That's particularly interesting.
Yeah. Now, just before we go into that, I just want to cover Prism Audio really quickly, because that's no small acquisition, Jules. I mean, you kind of said, oh, yeah, we kind of acquired it in 2019. I mean, Prism Audio is probably one of the most highly respected, high-end audio companies, over the last few decades, easily. I mean, especially the converter technologies were really highly respected. Still, very highly respected. And then they kind of got into the interfaces as well, which is where I have encountered them over the last 15 odd years or so. But the thing that intrigues me just a little bit is the Sadie DAW. I mean, when I read that, I went, what? That goes back to the 90s. The last time I saw a Sadie, I think I mentioned it in our pre-chat, was about 1998.
It's still going. The BBC Radio here, they have something like more than 300 editors using that every day. And it's getting harder and harder to find a PC that it'll run on.
But the cards themselves, they can't be the old PCI.
Oh no,
cards.
They're not using we have like a version that doesn't use hardware,
right?
But even so, like this is, I mean, it's an old piece of software. It's and we're struggling at the moment to know what to do with it. It needs a rewrite, but also the people who use Sadie, they generally like old school editors, and they love it, and they don't want to part with it, and they don't want anything to change. You can't change the bitmaps on the buttons. You can't change the colors. They don't want anything to change because they've got their keystrokes down pat. They can just bam, bam, bam. They can just move so quickly on that. So, and it's all like high speed. The kind of uses that they use it for are generally public broadcasters like the BBC, where they're doing drama and news production, and it's all just quick chop, chop, chop. So it's all about workflow. And that works for them, and they don't want you to touch it. But it would be really nice. Yeah, we've been kicking around ideas about where that should go, because it's still a great brand. And with all the podcasting, it is apparently quite popular now, and lots of people are doing this kind of long form voice and drama and sort of editing themselves. There is a market for that as a less Windows 95 looking product.
Yeah.
It does have that sort of GDI look and feel to it there.
It's almost Windows 3.1. It's
yeah.
Even the website's got that better on IE6 kind of look to it.
Now remember that other DAW we were discussing in the pre-chat, Jules, that I couldn't remember? Soundscape. SSL Soundscape. Now, that was originally SSL acquired Soundscape, and so there was hardware and software, and then they ran with the software, and I think it's all kind of finished up. It's all buttoned up now, but that was the other one, Soundscape.
Yeah.
And that went back to the 90s as well. And I know what these editors in the broadcasters, our ABC doesn't use Sadie, but they use escapes me now. It's another one of the European dedicated DAWs with DSP. And again, see, I should know it, but it's just straight over the top of my head. But they use some of the more traditional ones, but the guys that are using the older stuff, you know, you're going to pry it out of the dead end, essentially, especially exactly like you've said about Sadie. You know, they're going,
they don't care. They don't want to learn something new. They've got a thing that does what they need. They want to keep doing it. They just want to they would want to cut the show, get it done, go to the pub.
Get to the pub quickly.
Get to the pub.
And it's the same. It's like what's that other DAW in America that's got, it looks like something out of 1995. I mean, it's got a horror font. A Saw. Have you ever seen that?
Oh,
the guy just refuses to update the GUI. I've gone, it's got a horror font. God, fuck's sake, get rid of it. Nah, won't do it. So there you go. Oh boy. All right. Sorry for that segue. Let's get into the Cmajor software. This is your new endeavor. So to speak, and this is the DSP Language Platform. And I know Pete wants to kind of get onto that as well. So Pete, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah. So tell us a bit about what you're doing there, and more importantly, I think the why of it.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, so around the time, I guess it was 2018 or something. I'd been doing JUCE for a long time, and I started being convinced that the way all of this stuff had to go in the future was away from C++. It had to be, everything else was getting away from building native apps with a compiler and then shipping them. So we had, the web interfaces were doing everything amazingly well. OpenGL and shader languages were letting people write stuff in a browser. They'd write a little piece of shader code, and that would run on your GPU on any old platform, PC, Mac, doesn't really matter. It would, and it would accelerate that little bit of functionality with a domain-specific language really, really fast. And I started thinking, well, why has this not happened to audio? Why has my phone got a DSP in it, but I can't run my own code on that DSP? My phone's got a GPU, and I can write something in a shader language that runs on that GPU. It takes advantage of all the crazy things it can do, but I can't do that on my DSP. And I never can. And the only way to do it is to hack the operating system, and it's probably, get through all the security layers to get some code running on this DSP. And really the difference is that for audio, we don't have a little domain-specific language that is safe and secure, and that could actually be set so in which you could write a little program that would be safely run on maybe a DSP, maybe a CPU, maybe GPU, but something that's actually dedicated to audio. And that's, as well as being nice to be able to do that and take advantage of a DSP, it cuts out a lot of overhead. So what I want is my DAW, I fire it up on my laptop, and I want the DSP not to be running on my laptop. I want the DSP to be running on some sort of chip in my audio I/O box.
Yep.
Because that's where it needs to be, and then it can be running with no latency on some bare metal real-time system on there. At 16 sample buffers, and I don't really care. And my laptop's then freed up to do all the UI and the boring stuff. But we don't have a system for doing that, because all the audio code at the moment has been written in C++, compiled for a particular type of CPU, shipped as a binary.
Yep. So
I sat down to try and figure out how that problem would be solved, because as soon as I realized that, I thought, okay, that's inevitably going to be where we end up in 10 years. And if I don't do it, now I've had the idea, and someone else goes and does it badly, I'm going to be annoyed for the rest of my life, because I will think, I had that idea and I never did it. So, so I tinkered around. We had a sort of an abortive attempt at it while I was at Rowley, and I left Rowley, and we were chatting about it with the guys at Native Instruments, and they were interested in this. So I joined Native Instruments to develop this system in about 2021, I think that was. And we spent 2 years building that, and called it Cmajor, because it's a C family language, like C++ and C and C sharp and C, Objective-C and all the other Cs.
Yep.
So essentially it is this. It's a language where you write all of your DSP in this simple, familiar looking language that runs very, very fast, but you don't compile it. It gets JIT compiled and runs on demand, basically.
Right. So did you write the jitter for it as well, or?
We've written everything. We've written the compiler, front end, back end. It's been, it's kind of, I think if you're a programmer, then writing a compiler is a sort of bucket list thing to do.
Right.
So as I've got more and more removed from music and things, I've gone into more of the geeky end of tools for developers. So
yeah, last time I did that, it was Lex and Yak were the things to use. So
yeah, but no, it's we're really pleased with the way it's turned out, and we've got it now. So as well as running very fast natively, you can run it in a browser. So it'll compile to WebAssembly and run with web audio, and we've got a lovely system for writing. We're not calling it a plugin; we're calling it a patch. You write a Cmajor patch. Which is basically a bundle of Cmajor code and some web JavaScript kind of GUI code, and then the same patch can be then exported. We can just load it and play it with the JIT engine, which generally goes a bit faster than the C++ version would have been, or you can export it to C++, or you can export it as a JUCE plugin that's completely native and you just compile it, or you can export it as a clap plugin. Or we can export it as a bundle for a website with WASM and web audio to play it. Or you can dynamically JIT it in the browser. So basically, we've built this very, very portable system for building these patches, where the UI and the code, the DSP code, can both run exactly unchanged in all these different environments.
Do you have a WASM for folks on the thing here as WebAssembly?
Yes, WASM, yeah.
So do you have a hardware abstraction model that you've built out, or is it all just running on the targets you were talking about here? Like you'd mentioned might have a USB device or something with a DSP chip in it.
We haven't done one yet. We haven't got one yet. We haven't had the time to actually build that as a target. But from like day one, the whole architecture of the system has been designed so you can do that. So, the kind of dream is that you go to a website and someone's got a patch on the website. And they've not compiled this. It's just script. It's just their Cmajor DSP and some web UI. And you load it in your browser, and then the browser connects over the network to your Google Home type device in the corner. And the DSP, rather than being compiled to run on the computer, gets sent across and then that runs the audio, and then it syncs the GUI on your screen to the thing running on the device over the web. Now we've got all the pieces to do that, and that's the architecture we've designed it for. So yeah, it's going well. This is all open source as well.
So what's the next step for it then?
Oh, so many things to do. I mean, I'm just in the middle of getting it into the Tracktion engine, so we'll have the next version of Waveform with a point release that has Cmajor support. And what that means is you'll be able to load a Cmajor patch just like any other plugin. But the great thing about them is that you can have, if you're writing a patch, you can have Waveform there running the patch as a plugin. So you're streaming stuff through it, you get play a loop through it, play some MIDI through it. But you can be editing the code, and every time you save, it'll reload the patch without interrupting the session. So you can just tweak things, tweak the user interface, tweak the DSP, and it will just live reload. So it kind of cuts out this 5-minute turnaround that you have as a plugin developer, where you kind of go, I'm going to change this line of code, probably quit the DAW, recompile, wait, load up the DAW, reload your session, reload the plugin. Right. Or best case, you kind of have to unload the plugin and reload it in the DAW.
Right.
It'll just magically update. So the workflow is really nice.
Yeah, and wait while the DAW scans your whole plugin folder again, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I've done that too much.
So are you getting to a point where you're going to be headed towards creating a standard that's like, in the Windows world, we have like DirectX and stuff for GPUs. Mm-hmm. Are you getting to the point where you're going to have something like that for audio devices where they'll support Cmajor and you'll have a channel that you can use at DSP?
Yeah, that's absolutely on the, that's the roadmap. So we're in this sort of chicken and egg situation with it, where we need, like, if there were a million people writing this stuff, everyone would want to support it in their hardware. You'd want, Apple would want to support it in their run it on their onboard DSP. And also, if it was supported on the hardware, you'd get people writing. So we're trying to get the momentum going, or at least be the, it feels like somehow at some point somebody is going to get the momentum for a system like this. And I hope it's ours, because I think we've got it right. But we're sort of doing our best to kick that off. It's going down well. I mean, people are liking it, and it works well.
All right. So what's the Native Instruments role here in this project?
We've split out from them now. They kind of funded us to kick things off. So they're keeping a stake in it, and they're going to use it themselves, which was their intention. But we're kind of an independent company now. So we're just which is also important, because we want everyone in the industry to use this. Yeah, I think if we'd stayed at Native Instruments, it would have been seen as like, some of the big rivals might go, we're not going to adopt that because it's Native Instruments. So we are like, it's open source now, it's completely open source, and we're very independent. We want to work with everyone and get it into as many hosts as we can. But it's one of these things. It's going to be an uphill struggle getting the momentum going. While we're waiting for the kind of the number of patches out there to grow. But one of the places I think we'll win in the long run with it is it's really good for teaching. We've already had some interest from universities who teach DSP courses, because if you're teaching DSP to students, at the moment you might have it you might tell them to write it in C++. They might use JUCE, or they might use some other framework. But to actually get a student up and running with C++ and teach them what you can and can't do in C++ in a plugin, and just do the boilerplate around it and compiling it and running it and installing it, it's a whole load of overhead that isn't DSP.
Right.
When what you really want to teach them about is the maths behind DSP and how to actually write the algorithms. That's what you're trying to teach them. But 90% of what the students are going to be doing is boilerplate and, you can't do that in C++. Oh, you accidentally allocated or crashed.
Right.
So to have a system like Cmajor where, you don't have to install anything. You can open VS Code and go click on the Cmajor extension and just write Cmajor, and you can hear it and see it and hear it playing. And as you change the code, it plays, and you can't crash it because it's designed so you can't. And you can't do anything illegal in real-time code.
Nice. So it's safer and cuts down on the ceremony.
Yeah. Exactly. So you can just, if you're teaching this, you can just focus on like, okay, we're going to write this algorithm. Here's the code, and it looks like C.
Yep.
And a lot of it reads like C, but without all the bits that you have to tell them not to use.
And getting into education is smart. I mean, it certainly worked for Python and AI, right? So, like having this become kind of a de facto DSP language for university will end up resulting in a lot of this code being created. Because on the AI side, we see tons of stuff that's started in university as like come out into audio products. Some of the, I forget which company did it, but they have the drums, the AI generated drums. It might have actually been Steinberg. Yeah. But it was all, based on university work, and so you end up leveraging that.
Yeah, and our other kind of strategy is that we have all these exports, so you can write your Cmajor patch, but then you can export it as a real plugin, export it as a VST. So you can make a product. It's nice and easy to make the product, and then you just spit out a VST or an AU and actually sell that as a real product, and nobody has to know it's got Cmajor inside.
All right, here's the hard question for Cmajor.
Mm-hmm.
How much discussion did you have before you decided you were going to use the standard namespace as your default in Cmajor?
Quite a lot. But a lot of decisions we made were, our target audience for this is people who are probably familiar with C++ or one of those languages.
Yep.
JavaScript, Java, they all those languages, and they all kind of, there are patterns you expect to see. So a really big part of it for us is the structure of it is a little bit different in that you don't write classes but you do write processes that are like little cooperating threads that spin around, all each doing their work, and they all cooperate, and you can write hundreds of these little spinning things that work together. But each one looks like a bit of C code or a bit of C++ code. So things like, what do we call the standard namespace? It's like, well, we're going to call it stud because the people who are familiar with stud will expect that, and people who aren't, it's fine. So, we're not trying to, like other DSP languages out there, like the Fausts and some of the more esoteric ones. I mean, they're kind of they're taking a more academic approach to this. It's like, they're trying to write a beautiful, mathematically perfect thing that represents the audio process, but we're not. We kind of know our audience, and they're procedural coders who aren't interested in the fancy stuff and don't think functionally. They just want to like crank a loop and do some signs and do some number crunching like they've always done. So it's not that we're dumbing it down, but we know the target,
right?
For those people. So familiarity is important.
Yeah, I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes and hoping that we start seeing more standards based around it. And the idea of offloading DSP to devices in a standardized way is pretty exciting. So I'd love to see it go down that path.
I mean, we should have processing in our audio I/O boxes.
Yeah, that's where
it belongs. It should be there.
And some do, but it's proprietary.
Yeah,
exactly. They're walled gardens. The kind of the UAs.
Well, I mean, some of the other interfaces are using FPGAs for their mixer and their DSP in the mixer, and some are actually using the overhead that's left over from the FPGA to actually run plugins as well. So is that what you mean? Is it the FPGA or
not an FPGA so much? But yeah, I mean, you don't need much of a processor in an audio box to be useful. Like we've had Cmajor running on kind of Raspberry Pi sized devices,
right.
But running a kind of real time OS. Like we had it going on the I've forgotten the name now. There's a little board, the Bella board, that does like 16 sample real-time playback on a kind of Raspberry Pi level device, and we rigged it up so you could see your patch on, running on your laptop, and then this thing was actually running the DSP remotely, and you could do some it really cranked through it. And what I've always wanted to build, and hope I can at some point, would be an audio I/O box like that, where it's an I/O box. You plug it into your laptop. It's got all your ins and outs, but it's also got some processing on it. You can stick a patch on it, which will run with almost no latency because it's running on there. Unplug it and use it as a standalone box that keeps running the patch.
Yep.
So that could be your guitar effect. That could be your keyboard instrument. And then it's infinitely tweakable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do actually own an audio interface company, Jules. So I think you've got some stuff that you can play with there.
As long as the UI doesn't change, you're all good.
Yeah.
As long as the color doesn't change, we'll get away with it.
No. I'm not talking about Sadie. I'm talking about the Prism audio interfaces.
Right.
We know.
Yeah. Hey.
All part of it.
Yeah. Well, look, that's all very interesting and exciting again, thinking outside the box, Jules, right? So,
No, he's literally trying to think inside the box. It's just an external box, right?
I know. I want to get in that box. Yeah. The box is external.
Yeah. So, you are definitely a modern day music tech pioneer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Even though I'm so young.
Yeah.
I was feeling old before this show, and now you've made me feel young.
Well, look, it's not going to be a music tech pioneer. Well, I might do it as a little subtext. Because seriously, between JUCE and breaking off the Tracktion engine and now with Cmajor, look, there are other people doing pioneering stuff, obviously, but you've had a massive influence on our industry, even though it's been a little bit, under the radar for a lot of people. And the more I was investigating and researching for the show, and also even Pete, he's just gone, hang on, Jules is the guy behind JUCE. And I've gone, yeah. He's kind of, oh, yeah, right, got to get this fella on. And there you go. So look, at this point, I think I just, and you don't have to answer this in any great detail, but I always ask the guests this, and that is thoughts on the current state of music technology and the future of development in that area. And I mean, of course, we're going to be probably diving into AI. You don't necessarily have to, but have you got any thoughts on, the current state and where things are heading?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my thoughts on where things should head are what I was just saying about Cmajor. It feels like we need to get away from compiled C++ code running on a particular machine. It needs to go the way the web's gone.
Right.
And it will, and it's inevitable because entropy will push us that way. The whole AI thing, I don't feel like I have much of an opinion to offer about that. I mean, I'm sort of watching it, and you're seeing these very impressive demos coming out, but the whole black box nature of it, just make it okay. You can ask it to make me a track with a particular style, and it will. But how useful? There are uses for it. I guess they're not really uses that I'm interested in. I think the things that I'm interested in are people making music and the tools that people use to make music, and how AI might influence those. So, for example, we were just talking today about how we would go about adding a kind of large language model to the Tracktion engine, so you could tell it, hey, add me a track with some guitar effects in it, or cut out the second chorus and stick it at the end, and it would be able to actually interpret that and control the app or control the engine to make those changes to a session. And that's interesting. I think Pro Tools did some demo like that I've missed recently. So I think there's probably a future for that. But then even with that, it's like, is that going to be a gimmick? I'm not sure. It's definitely, there's probably very important AI stuff going on right now that I'm missing, that I'll regret and look back on and thought, why didn't I spot that as being important?
I think a lot of where that comes from, Jules, is the most visible aspects of AI right now are the generative stuff, like all the examples that you gave, as opposed to the other quieter ones that happen behind the scenes, like what Vin does for dialogue extraction and some other things here when working on this, where it's more taking the jobs that you hate doing or like really hard to do and making those much easier, as opposed to trying to steal from your creativity, That's true. That is true. And there is some really good work. I mean, the Isotope guys were doing some really good work like that at Native Instruments recently. So there is, there's a lot going on. I don't know. I guess it's funny. I should be more interested in AI than I am in machine learning. It feels like, and I was, another old friend of mine was saying this the other day. It's like, why aren't we more interested in this? It's really important. It's really clever. And especially the stuff you're seeing about how it can help write code. It's almost a bit depressing that at some point, the stuff that we enjoy doing as coders is maybe become a niche pastime rather than an actual career, because this stuff will do it better or help to the point where you don't need to learn this stuff. And I think a lot of us do this because we like doing it rather than because it pays the bills. Yep.
And that's probably true of music as well. Maybe some people like doing all the stuff that AI will replace. But then there's always the boring stuff that it can automate.
Yeah. Right. I've voiced my concern with the generative stuff, and like even a couple of shows ago, I was saying to Pete, you know what, I still haven't heard anything that's been convincing from a song start to finish. And I literally within a couple of days, I said, hey, Pete, check this out. And I can't remember. It's based on ChatGPT, but, you'd type in, funk jazz with a saxophone, with a techno beat and some heavy metal vocal, and you're like, what? Mm. And it actually spits it out. But some of the more traditional type of stuff that it was popping out, if you didn't know it was AI, you wouldn't pick it. Where I knew it was AI, so I could hear some of the more probably the vocal stuff. But I mean, it was pulling off like I'm into progressive metal. It was pulling off heavy guitar stuff. I'm like, oh shit, I mean, how far off is this? That's the stuff that I don't like, because there's this huge ethical question that sits over the top of that. And myself and Pete have discussed this numerous times on the show. I like using the AI in my creative processes, like Pete said, especially with the dialogue type of stuff, where I can pull out the train, the dog, the cat, the cereal, the cereal bowl and whatever else is actually going on in the background. That stuff I find really good, but the generative stuff, it's like an out of control train at the moment, and how far it goes, we're not quite sure yet. But I did hear. I was watching an interview. Actually, I was reading an interview with the Linux developer. What's his name?
Linus Torvalds.
That's the fella. And he was asked about AI, and he started chuckling. He just says, "Mate, AI to me is just like autocorrect on steroids." I thought that's actually a good comment, because he was saying, they were asking, is AI going to be, beneficial to writing the kernel, or actually improving the kernel? And that's when he just said, look, AI to me is autocorrect on steroids.
People have different opinions on it. I mean, it's super helpful a lot of times for, again, not so much the stuff that you want to do, but the stuff that you have to do. Like AI can be good for fuzz testing your code, right? And making sure that there's lots of like generated test cases there that you may not have thought of. Is it going to replace programmers anytime soon? I doubt it. There was a pretty good comment by, I forget which person it was, somebody relatively famous in the programming circle that said, hey, if to generate a prompt sufficiently detailed to describe your entire program that you want generated exactly the way you want it generated, is itself a programming language at that point. So it's kind of weird that way. But I think for the music creation side of things, there are some people that are already getting hurt by this. So Vin, the example you brought up, a lot of folks say like, oh, but it lacks soul, it lacks the feel, which it does, but so does all the background music that people have to create for YouTube and corporate video stuff and everything else. So those people are actually getting hit first with losing all their jobs and their royalties for this.
Yep, 100%. And, and we could even argue, a lot of current pop music isn't exactly very
I didn't want to
soulful,
go there.
Yeah, but I don't think pop music that people choose to listen to and buy is going to be replaced by anything, and no matter how good it is that's AI generated, because people want to, and it's a human thing. That stuff is that humans want to hear other humans performing.
Well, there's that.
Whereas you're completely right. The YouTube background music certainly will get replaced. I mean, that's just going to happen, isn't it?
Jules, I need
to. Shame, but
I need to introduce you to the massive. Oh, this is going to get me flamed. The massive nerd audience of the created stuff like Hatsune Miku and others, where you're looking at a video of something. There is no person on the stage. It's a projection of an anime character.
Yeah. And I think they used JUCE for that, actually. I do remember they were a JUCE user, the guys who did the Hatsune Miku.
And look, for me, the whole AI and how you use it creatively. Now, I have to go back to 2019 for this, and this is something that I just stumbled back on. I remember listening to this artist back then, and I listened to this album and I went, shit, this thing is unbelievable. And it's Holly Hedren, and I can't remember the name of the album, but this is 2019, and she actually created an AI machine where she would actually teach it. They'd sing to it and they'd speak to it, and then all of a sudden it started generating and creating a personality, and then started spitting back some vocal stuff. And some of the stuff that it spat back was hilarious when it first started generating some spoken word stuff, because there's a section there where it was just, they were throwing, singing to it and speaking to it for days, just machine learning. All of a sudden it spits out a string of expletives, and they've gone, what the fuck was that? And of course they had a recording, and it's in one of her songs. But you've got to listen to that Holly Hedren stuff. That was very eerie, and I'm actually now just thinking about it, the hairs are actually raising up my arms, just how unique it was in 2019, how advanced it was, and just and when you realise that a lot of the vocals were actually generated by a machine. That was the creative aspect of AI that I really liked, because she wasn't trying to replace a human. She was using AI basically it was like not a pet, but it was she was creating almost an entity by just speaking to it, machine learning, and then this thing became creative and started spitting back some stuff where they could use it in the songs. You go back and listen to that, and you got to think it was 6 years ago.
Holly Herndon.
So the thing that excites you about it is not the content that the AI generated. The thing that the reason the hair stood up on your neck is because you knew there was an artist using tools in that way to create this effect. So whereas if all that happened is if she just asked an AI to generate something and then you played it with no creative input, it wouldn't have been exciting at all, even if the result had been the same.
No, there wouldn't have been anything to it. Now, so she's taken that one step further, and I think she was 5 years ahead of the curve, all right? Holly was at least 5 years ahead of the curve. And I think now she's got a name for this AI engine, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's a version 2 of it now where you can actually send her some idea stems, arrangements, song stems, and then she feeds it into this AI, and it will, using your stems, and then actually create and produce something that is in context with what you've actually fed it. But it's not. So
it's called Spawn, or at least the original one was called Spawn.
One. Yeah, Spawn. So it's not actually trying to replicate, your latest pop starlet, or get a vocal to sound like a particular singer, and it's not trying to generate, a content that is actually going to decimate that smaller segment, or not that smaller, that segment of ad music. I can see where it's already impacting, and I've got personal friends that are actually getting hit very, very hard with this already, and they would work a lot in short, film, TV, more like ad. It's more the ad stuff where they've absolutely been decimated straight away. They're like, well, what do I need you for? I need a 30-second clip of music. I'm not going to pay you X amount when I can go to this website now that I've just registered and go, I need a pop funk, with saxophone. Off you go, I think that's where it's going to be. But if you also notice the ethical side of it, there's some major record companies and artists that are all coming out and pushing back now. Now, I don't know, it'd be like, an ant pushing back against the bloody boulder, but it is interesting.
Roland and Universal Music.
Yes, I showed you that one. Yeah, I showed you that one, yeah. I think the trains the brakes are off and it's run through the station, and I think it's out of control at the moment. So I don't know how they're going to rein that back in, but it'll be interesting to watch, I think.
Yeah. The Roland one is with Paul, who's on the executive board of the MIDI Association with me. So
right, okay. Well, I don't know what they're going to try and achieve, because I think it's already out of control. It's not out of control. I mean, the horse is bolted, So
it's good to set some statements of intent, I think, is like, how enforceable is it? Well, I don't know, but like, giving folks an idea that, hey, this is what we want to do and this is the general thing. Yeah. It's like the same stuff I do inside the company where I'm just telling folks when I see random AI generated images and stuff in slides, I'm like, don't do that.
Yeah. Look, again, it comes down to that ethical side. I read an interview and I sent that to you, Pete. I'm not sure if you read it, but it's in one of those major, what used to be a counterculture magazine. I'm not going to name it because I'm not a fan of it, but there was an interview with the guys that actually are behind that music, that ChatGPT generated music thing. And after reading it, I was absolutely furious. These guys just did not give a shit. They're not even musicians. They couldn't give a fuck whether they were going to decimate a certain area. They just saw the potential of what this could do. And if you read the interview, you kind of go, well, these guys are all in it for the money. They couldn't give a shit about any type of creative space and they don't care if they're going to be wiping out whole segments of a creative space because that wasn't what motivated them to actually create it.
Listen, we're going off the rails enough here, Vin, that I can't even hear the train from Jules Audio anymore. So
come on, mate. Hang on. Do you want me to fire up the saxophone?
No, don't do that.
You can probably AI generate some trains to add in the
quiet. Oh yeah, I'll throw in some sound effects from my Soundly library. That'll be nice.
Oh yeah, there you go.
There you go. All right, guys. I think that's probably a good point to put a pin in it, and I'm sure that, Jules, we're going to have a round 2 with this, and I think next time we'll drag Dave in as well.
Yeah, he knows way more than me about the weeds of optimizing these things now.
Yeah, and I want Pete to actually go and watch Dave's talks because you guys have a pretty, maybe it might not be unique, but your approach to optimizing the audio engine, I think, is different enough from what I'm actually experiencing from the other DAW developers. I think that's the best way for me to actually voice this because I can only comment on the actual practicality, what I'm actually seeing, what this engine is doing. Yours are doing something very, very different, and this is why we're going to be having further discussions because I think that little engine, it's the little engine that I think could actually, I tell you what it could do, it could actually hand some of the bigger guys their asses. That's what I think it can do, right? Very, very impressive. And I'll be working more with that, and we'll be discussing more about the DAW benchmark. If that actually comes about, that'd be awesome.
Excellent. It's so nice when other people are interested in things that are so geeky.
Yeah, well, have a look at us.
Not just me.
The 3 geeks. There you go. Kind of geekorama. All right. I think on that, thank you very, very much, guys. That was fantastic. And I think we can end it there. So with that, on to the next.